halca. My name is Dr. David Breckner, and I'm the Executive Director of the Imperial Valley Desert Museum. Today, we are going to learn about the first peoples of the region, the Kumeyaay. The Kumeyaay are the indigenous peoples who have lived and currently live in Imperial County, San Diego County, and Baja California, Mexico for over 10,000 years. The Kumeyaay are masters of the desert. They have become accustomed to the changing climates and conditions in their traditional territories. Today, we will be exploring further conditions the Kumeyaay encountered pre-contact, upon the arrival of explorers and settlers, and the challenges these groups posed on the Kumeyaay lifestyle. Let's begin by examining the Kumeyaay lifestyle pre-contact before their beliefs and way of life were challenged. The Kumeyaay are made up of self-governing bands or family-based clans, giving freedom to govern themselves and their own affairs. The Kumeyaay had clearly defined territories that included individual and collectively owned properties. The Kumeyaay lived in a dome-shaped home called an iwa. The frame of the home was made from willow branches and leaves, and the covering was made of tule reeds, willow leaves, and other brush. Stones were placed around the base of the house to keep out small animals and to protect against the wind. Now, let's turn over to Corey, who will explain to us another important aspect of the Kumeyaay way of life, the freedom of movement.
Halca. My name is Corey and I'm an education specialist here at IVDM. The Kumeyaay were a nomadic people. This meant they didn't have permanent homes, but instead they would switch between their seasonal homes when food was scarce.
The Kumeyaay's traditional territories extended from the Pacific Ocean through mountains and valleys, desert, to the ancient Lake Cahuilla, present-day the Salton Sea. The Kumeyaay would move through their different geographical locations to gather food, resources, trade, and visit ceremonial sites. The Kumeyaay would also move between their summer and winter camps depending on the seasons and climate. The oceans, rivers, and lakes would provide fish, mollusks, and shells. The mountains and valleys would provide large game, plants, berries, and acorns. The desert was rich in resources. Many plants with medicinal properties could be found here. The desert also provided small game, different types of clay used for making pottery, and materials for making tools. The Kumeyaay's nomadic lifestyle not only provided them with a variety of food and resources, but also the ability to observe traditional ceremonies and celebrations.
Halca, everyone. My name is Angelina, and I'm the Education Coordinator at the Imperial Valley Desert Museum. The Kumeyaay's religion and beliefs are the most important components of the Kumeyaay culture. It is the basis of their daily lives and celebrations. Kumeyaay creation stories and oral histories passed down communicate the importance of keeping tradition and culture alive. Cosmology is very important to the Kumeyaay. For thousands of years, they have looked at the heavens for guidance. They charted the moon, planets, equinoxes, solstices, and the movement of the constellations. The Kumeyaay New Year is celebrated in September. It signifies the start of the year during the fall equinox. The occurrences in the midnight sky would provide a timeline for the practices and rituals performed by the Kumeyaay. These celestial events orchestrated when plants could be harvested, moving between camps, and practice ceremonies. The Kumeyaay openly and actively practiced their way of life. Unfortunately, their culture and beliefs would be challenged with the arrival of the Spanish.
With the arrival of the Spanish, the Kumeyaay would face new occupants in their traditional lands and a change in their lifestyles. This arrival would mark the beginning of a variety of new interactions and responses by the Kumeyaay to these new peoples. On July 1st, 1769, a Franciscan friar, Father Junipero Serra, and a Spanish Capitan, Don Caspar de Portola, would establish and found the first colony in Alta California, modern-day San Diego. On July 16th, Father Serra would establish Mission San Diego de la Cala. The mission was originally built on Presidio Hill, an area long occupied by the Kumeyaay. The Spanish quickly recognized the importance of the lands they had encountered, rich in water sources and land for farming. In 1774, Father Serra moved his mission to a new site, 6 miles to the northeast, closer to the San Diego River, where Mission San Diego de la Cala currently resides, overlooking Highway 8, the Kumeyaay Highway. In 1775, a group of Kumi attacked the mission in a raid 1 month after its completion, a result of escalating tensions over Spanish occupation and settlement across the region. Some sources describe this as a flashpoint in which underlying tensions at last boiled over, although it bears note that several Kumi had already been baptized prior to its destruction. When the mission was rebuilt a year later, some of the Kumi entered the mission system, were baptized, and adopted Catholicism, which they passed down to their descendants. A number of Kumi never entered the mission systems and continued to observe their traditional beliefs and ceremonies. Some who were baptized also continued to practice their old ways in secret or alongside Christianity. The daily lives of the Kumi were no longer marked by the heavens and occurrences in the midnight sky, but rather by the mission bells. The ringing in the mission bell signified when the Kumi would wake, work, eat, pray, and sleep. The Kumi were taught farming and ranching techniques, as well as how to raise and care for livestock. They were no longer providing for their family groups, but for everyone who lived and worked at the mission. They no longer traveled long distances to ceremonial sites, but across mission quarters to attend religious services. In 1821, Mexico won its independence from Spain. This meant that Mexico, rather than Spain, was now in control of California. The government in Mexico was no longer interested in supporting the missions, and in 1833, they decided that all mission lands should be transferred into large grants called ranchos. The traditional and most attractive lands of the Kumi traded hands once more, overlooking their original inhabitants. This transfer was called secularization, and it marked the end of the mission period in California. The ending of the mission period began a new era of Mexican government occupation and ranchos.
The decline of the missions allowed for the rise of extensive ranching along the California coast and in the Sacramento Valley. Ranchos were made up of fields of crops, pastures for cattle and horses, and hundreds of workers. Some of the Kumi returned to their villages, while others found themselves working for the Mexican ranchos. Much like the Spanish, the Mexican rancheros also faced resistance by some of the Kumi raiding their ranchos. Just as they had for the mission system, the Kumi provided most of the labor for the developing ranching economy. The daily life of the Kumi on the ranchos followed the same pattern as the missions very closely, but it came with more freedom. Each morning would begin with a meal, followed by work until lunchtime, and after lunch, time of rest was provided. Then, one would continue their work day until dinner, followed by free time until bedtime. Life on the ranchos was hard labor. Some of the Kumi worked as vaqueros but received no money. Instead, they received clothing, food, and shelter. The missions were established to convert indigenous peoples to Christianity, faith and salvation in exchange for labor to sustain the missions. On the other hand, land grants during the rancho period provided half of mission land to the Kumi, a promise that was never kept. Instead of receiving a portion of traditional lands, the Kumi resorted to crop production and raising livestock on these lands. The rancho period only lasted a little over a decade before the United States took control over Mexican territory.
The rancho period concluded with the Mexican-American War that concluded in 1848. American settlers and the Mexican government had begun to dispute over lands and the Rio Grande in Texas. United States President James K. Polk was aware of the rich fertile lands in California and wanted them for the U.S. Once California became part of the United States, rancho owners needed to provide proof to the U.S. government that the land belonged to them.
On September 9, 1850, California was admitted into the United States. This created a political border between California and Baja California in Mexico, which created an artificial barrier between the Kumi people of the north and the south.
Despite all the efforts of the indigenous peoples of California, the United States government did not consider indigenous populations as citizens or granted them the right to vote. How this issue was faced and continues to change is a matter for a later time.
Today, we have further explored the conditions the Kumi encountered pre-contact, upon the arrival of explorers and settlers, and the challenges these groups posed to the Kumi lifestyle. Currently, the Kumi people, alongside other indigenous groups, are actively working to reclaim their traditions, beliefs, and traditional territories. The flag of the Kumi Nation now waves at Presidio Park, where Father Junipero Serra blessed the first Spanish mission in California.
Here at IVDM, our mission is to preserve, interpret, and celebrate the desert through outstanding collections, research, and educational programs. We make this possible through preserving and displaying artifacts and objects in our outstanding collections and encompassing over 10,000 years of history. We also work closely and in partnership with several tribes and tribal organizations to preserve and celebrate these traditional lands in our own deserts and even here at IVDM.
Through these efforts, we acknowledge the first peoples of the region, their culture, beliefs, and their traditional territories. We provide a space to share their stories, cultural knowledge, and traditions for generations to come.